There you are joining us with yet another WION exclusive coming to you from Colombo, Sri Lanka. On this edition, we are joined by Mr. Jeevan Thondaman, the Minister of Water Supply and Estate Infrastructure Development. Hello, Mr. Thondaman. How are you?
I'm good. Thank you for having me.
Starting off with this interesting question. You are Sri Lanka's youngest cabinet minister at the age of 29. Are you following the footsteps of the current president, Mr. Wickremesinghe, in that regard?
I mean, to be fair, I don't think I do think it's a privilege and an honor to be to have this label, youngest cabinet minister in the history of Sri Lanka. But it also shows the state of affairs in our country. I mean, the involvement of youth in politics, and I've always said that I'm a product of nepotism. I've never shied away from it. But
is nepotism essential to succeed in politics,
no,
especially in this part?
I wouldn't say it's essential, but at the same time, I would be lying if I said no. It's we all are equal. At the end of the day, if I do come from a political family, I do have a platform, from where I can get into, say, any institution. It can be parliament, local government, whatever it is, right? But that same platform may not be necessarily available for someone else who may be more qualified than me, who may have better experience than me. But at the end of the day, I think nepotism, at the end of the day, it's a sword or a shield, right? It depends on how you use it. Now, if I've come in being the youngest cabinet minister, it should be my job to open up the doors for other youngsters. But if I don't do that and I focus on myself and my family, then that would be wrong. So, yeah.
So, in your sense, if not for nepotism, would you have been successful in politics?
Well, it's hard to say because at the end of the day, politics is something where, especially in our region, nepotism is so deeply entrenched where it's difficult to picture a scenario without that. But also at the same time, I think if you look at the parliament also, I mean, MPs under the age of 30, I'm the only one, right? And if you look at the number of MPs below the age of 40, there's but a handful. So when you have, and even right now in Sri Lanka, you have 1.1 million fresh voters. So more or less, you have 1.1 million people whose voices are not being echoed in parliament, right? So I think that's why we're working on, bringing in a quota or reservation for youth and women in parliament. And I think that would definitely bring about a change. Because if you look at this economic crisis, we had, the president was confident enough to trust the younger MPs. In fact, you look at the State Finance Minister, Honorable Shehan Singh, you look at the Minister of Power and Energy, Kanchana Vijaysekara, they've all performed. And that's one of the reasons why we're out of this mess. Now, if you take my institution, the president had entrusted me with the Water Supply Ministry. And with this Water Supply Ministry, I was dealing with a loss of 2.8 billion rupees a month, and which is a significant contributor to this economic crisis. Now, 1 year down the line, we managed to make it sustainable. We are capable of providing more connections, and we're making a profit of 6.2 billion. So at the end of the day, sometimes you've got to trust the younger generation.
You're also seen as a voice for the minorities of Sri Lanka. This election seems to be quite interesting for these said minority groups, given that there are varying factions of these minority representative parties who are now showing their support either to President Wickremesinghe or to the opposition leader Sajith Premadasa. In your view, how important will be the role of minorities for this presidential election, and who do you think they will be backing this time?
Well, I think the minority vote is going to be divided this time in terms of alliances and affiliations, because if you look at the front runners of the election, you have the sitting president and you have the leader of the opposition. And if you look at the main candidates, none of them are candidates who preach extremism or nationalism. They've all been favorable in the views, in the eyes of the minorities at different points of time. So I think this time it's going to be quite interesting to see how the votes turn out. However, I think the president does have one foot higher simply because of the fact that he's a tried and tested leader, right? And despite facing numerous elections and losing, one of the main reasons why he had lost is because he refused to back down from his, policy, which is inclusivity. He had always, stood by the fact that equitable justice is needed, and well, let it be North and East, let it be the upcountry community, and in fact, the upcountry community in 2003, when the president was the prime minister then, he was instrumental in providing 300,000 people with their civic rights back. So people do trust that as well, and I think they are fearful of trying out new methods, if I may say that. But also, I think one more key turning point in this is we've always felt as a government that it's high time we offer permanent solutions, and those permanent solutions are what has led us to coming out of this economic crisis and political crisis. And one of the key matters that we noticed was the fact that you cannot have economic progression without social progression. You need everyone to come together. And the hill country community, which have been marginalized for over 200 years, the president had agreed to the cabinet paper which I submitted, where he wanted to provide rights to ownership of land to this community. So I think there is a lot of genuinity and there's a lot of goodwill amongst the minorities for the president, especially after in fact, it was my ministry which drafted the cabinet paper on issuing the apology to the Muslim community and all others who have been affected.
How important was that apology?
I think it was very important because when I took over this Ministry of Water Supply, I've had my friends and my close ones as well who were victims of this, terrible policy decision. And however, the former president, he based it on a decision or a recommendation which a certain panel of experts had given him. So when I took over the Ministry of Water Supply, we made it a point to come up with a report, and within 6 months we came up with a report, and we proved that COVID and groundwater contamination, it's not as extreme as how it was blown out to be. And utilizing that, we put a cabinet paper asking for issuing a formal apology. But I can tell you quite frankly, I think my agenda behind putting that a cabinet paper, because I know there are certain voices which said, it's just an apology, it's not going to erase what happened. No, it will not erase what happened, but it provides acknowledgement and recognition. And using that acknowledgement and recognition, we will be able to bring forward those who are responsible for this mess. So, yeah.
Certain factions, including some political candidates, feel that the current president is not quite confident coming into this election, and he would have tried multiple efforts or multiple schemes to sort of push back the elections or postpone it. As someone who is backing the current president for this election, this presidential election, what have you got to say about that?
To be fair, I think coming from a politician, you may be a bit skeptical about what I'm going to say, but in all honesty, the president, in my conversations with him, be it in cabinet or be it on a personal level, he has always reiterated the fact that elections will take place at the said time. And
he has no plans to push it back.
No. He has always stood firm on the fact that elections will take place. And also, you see, you've got to think of it, practically, right? At the end of the day, the president had not taken any steps to actually postpone elections. Yeah, there were people going and filing Supreme Court petitions and all that, but it's a democracy and there is a judiciary. At the end of the day, anyone's got the right to go and seek judicial help. But at the same time, if you were to look at the practicality of it, the president is a seasoned politician. He's been in this field for over 50 years. I think he is well aware of the fact that at this juncture, pushing elections would in fact cause him to be more or less breaking all the goodwill he has built over the past 2 years. So I don't think there was any substance to that.
People also claim that he's responsible for this bottleneck that was created between the executive, the legislature, and the judiciary over the appointing of a new IGP right before elections were declared. What do you have to say about that?
I think if you were just to backtrack a little bit, and if you were able to see how the IGP was appointed, and why the former IGP's extension was declined. At the end of the day, the president, he wanted to extend. the former IGP's tenure, and because he wanted to see out this term. And I think, in my view, I think the former IGP did an excellent job as well. And given the situation, I think people are just trying to find an excuse to hold him responsible for something. And in reality, I think the president was quite clear on the fact that he is a presidential candidate and his hands are tied when it comes to certain matters. We have a constitutional council, we have the parliament, and decisions can be made accordingly with relation to the election commission as well.
People are also of the view that President Wickremesinghe is not entering into this election with clean hands, given that a majority of the SLPP MPs have now joined hands with the president, the same MPs who were behind the Rajapaksas and who were sort of responsible for the 2022 economic crisis. So is the president really siding with the same MPs who brought ruin to the country?
Being one of the MPs who had backed SLPP initially, which is me and my party, the Ceylon Workers' Congress, I can tell you certain decisions that were taken during the Rajapaksa regime. It was unilateral. There was no consultation. There was decisions that were not that MPs were not privy to.
Who was calling these shots within the party?
You had the former president Gotabaya Rajapaksa. You had his team of advisors. And I don't believe there were MPs involved in that. Yes, maybe there were certain ministers who were hand in hand with certain decisions that took place. But for example, I can tell you from my personal experience. Now, we work with the tea estate. We have the largest tea estate union in the country. Now, when we were supporting President Gotabaya Rajapaksa, we went through his manifesto. And one of the key points that we saw was that the consumption of chemical fertilizer, that would be reduced by 50% over the course of 10 years. So we're looking at 5% per year, which we said is fair enough. That's something that was doable and we'll definitely support that. But when the decision was taken to ban chemical fertilizers overnight, now we were not consulted. Now, for us to be part of a government where we are the largest tea estate union and where we know for a fact overnight stoppage of chemical fertilizer is not feasible and it's not practical and it will not work, we were not consulted. So it came as a shock to us, and I think following that, we withdrew support to the government. So again, this is me just explaining the fact that there are MPs who are not privy or who are not privy to decisions that were taken during the Rajapaksa government. And here's the thing, at the end of the day, if you are going to put forward that statement, then there is a need to address the argument on why is the leader of the opposition taking the same people with, dirty hands, as he says. Because at the end of the day, if you've been following, you would notice that the same people who had supported President Rajapaksa are now supporting the leader of the opposition too. So it is a bit of a mix over there.
Speaking of the Sri Lanka Podujana Peramuna, you were part of the Sri Lanka Podujana Peramuna government back when they were in power. Is this really the end of that party, or are they just focusing on themselves and their family?
Look, at the end of the day, it's not my place to comment on another political party, but at the end of the day, just because there were bad decisions that were taken, and though the consequences were terrible, demonizing a party is, it goes against the very basis of democracy. If you look at it, I don't think you can find any party in this country with clean hands. If you were to look at the
including
NPP,
that of the president.
Yes, of course. Because Sri Lanka has a very dark history, right? And we have to address that. If you look at our history, all political parties have, indulged in either violence or, some sort of madness for, political gains or personal gains or for the security of the country. So, if you look at the NPP, for example, yes, they are the NPP, but the primary party within the NPP is the GVP. Their hands are definitely not clean if you look from the 80s. And at the end of the day, us commenting on that would not do justice to that party either. What should matter right now is, rather than looking at the past with clean, who has clean hands, who is going to, bring up the past, we need to look at who's going to drive us into the future. And whichever candidate has a good plan, an actionable plan on sustainability, that is the person who people should back.
Moving away from local politics to something that's happening across in the region, rather, the situation that's currently unfolding in Bangladesh. This is a scene that is a little all too familiar for Sri Lankans. Just over 2 years ago, in 2022, Sri Lanka faced somewhat of a similar scenario where the people were protesting against the government and we had a leader who fled, which is quite identical to what just happened in Bangladesh. What are the similarities you see between what happened in Sri Lanka and in Bangladesh, and what is the way forward for Bangladesh right now?
First of all, my thoughts and prayers are definitely with all those affected because of the issues that are going on in Bangladesh. But if you're going to ask me what's the difference between the two scenarios, it's all the same except just one bad move, right? Because if you were to just compare both situations, it's the exact same thing, and the only difference is President Ranil Wickremesinghe, he stepped up, he made the right decision, and at that particular point of time, the decisions that we were taking, we did not know whether it was going to be right or wrong. We were following the person who felt it would be right? And it paid off, because I was just watching the news today, and I noticed that the parliament has been stormed in Bangladesh. It did not happen in Sri Lanka. That's when President Wickremesinghe stepped in. When the parliament was about to be stormed is when we got the country under control, actually. But I think beyond that, there is one particular difference which I noticed, and I don't mean this in any hurtful way to, my friends in Bangladesh, but I think when you look at the protests that took place in Sri Lanka, whatever said and done, yes, there were issues. There have been different arguments, different theories, but whatever said and done, we felt that we were able to take control of the situation as a government and let democracy prevail and go on. But right now, if you look at Bangladesh, yes, the parliament has been dissolved, and those steps are taking place. But there's also the risk of the army taking over. And at the end of the day, when that takes place, going back from that is not going to be a simple task. And Bangladesh's history and the army's relationship with Bangladesh's history. So I think it is time to exercise caution, because you've got rising tensions, soaring tensions in the Middle East. And as far as this region is concerned, there needs to be some stability. If not, I think it's just going to be bad for the country. Be bad for the world overall. So,
Sri Lanka also has rather a field marshal who is entering the presidential race this time. Do you think he would also be following those moves of military power, military takeover, those mechanisms, or do you think he's coming into this election with a political move and motive in hand?
Well, I think two key factors must be taken in. Number one is the fact that the former president Gotabaya Rajapaksa has a military background, and I think after his stint in the office, I do believe the general public will be a bit skeptical about, a similar background person coming into that particular seat. But at the same time, we also take into account the fact that the Field Marshal Sarath Fonseka, he is retired, and he does have ample political experience from early on. And in fact, if he were to support the president, I think that would be beneficial overall, because at the end of the day, he does have a genuine intention. There's no doubt about that. And I do respect him, but I think people will be quite skeptical about getting a military person back into that seat. I think it's going to be a two-horse race, and we'll have to wait and see what happens.
Who will those two horses be, in your opinion?
Well, realistically speaking, I think it's going to be President Ranil Wickremesinghe and the leader of the opposition, Sajid Premdasan, realistically speaking. But you may never know. Time will tell. So I think in the coming weeks we will gain more clarity on the situations there.
This is also a very interesting election for Sri Lanka, given that as of right now, no candidate appears to have garnered that 50% majority. In the event that does not happen, we will go into something called a preferential voting system, where preferences of other candidates will be considered. In any way, are these frontrunners sort of looking at the other candidates, sort of fraternizing with these candidates for these preferential votes? Are there bigger tactics at play?
Well, there are no permanent friends and enemies in politics. I think the past 2 years have been quite evident on that fact. But I think I don't. I personally do not know for sure if any candidate will be able to, achieve 50% plus one. But right now, I think it is about consolidating the majority of the vote base, and I personally feel there will be bigger moves that will take place. And yes, at the end of the day, if, like I told you, it's a two-horse race. Eventually, in all political structures, in all elections, it eventually comes down to a two-horse race, right? At some point of time. So I do think certain candidates. Right now, there are 17 presidential candidates. There may be more uh, in the next week. But I think eventually certain members may drop out, certain candidates may drop out, and throw their weight behind who they feel will be, the right choice for the country. I mean, you can take a page out of the U.S. elections. You had strong front runners, and they all started dropping out. They started supporting candidate A, and then on this side you have the president who backed out. So I think we'll have to wait, and we would know more towards the end of this month, is what I feel.
The Sri Lanka Podujana Peramuna seems to be a little undecided or indecisive with who their candidate is. Why do you think that has happened? This is a stark contrast of how the party stood in the 2019 presidential election. And fast forward a few more years to now, they don't seem to have that power that they had back then. What really happened? Was it solely the economic crisis?
No, I think you need to look at history. Right? Sri Lanka as a country, as a nation, our history, we've never had sustainability. We've never been able to have a sustainable plan on moving forward, either on the financial side or, in terms of economy or in terms of investments or even FDIs. There's never been, a sense of stability or sustainability. And that's purely because we are trying to be a populist. We are not a populist economy. We should be an export-oriented economy. But we pretend to be a populist economy in order to secure votes. And that's what's led to this mess to begin with. Because if you were to look at all political parties that have come, from independence, either they have isolated other communities who have been here for hundreds of years for the sake of political favor, or they have, given out subsidy politics, freebies and whatnot, just to secure votes. Right? But they didn't realize the damage that they were doing. I mean, even political appointments. I always say this country has a population of about 22 million, maybe 23 million now. Out of this population of 22, 23 million, you need only 400,000 government servants. We have 1.5 million. And that's excluding the pensioners. So who's paying their salary and their perks and benefits? It's all the taxpayer money which can be used to benefit others. So going back to your question, if you look at it in terms of political ideology, each political party has their own ideology. And if you look at it in terms of political principles and ideology, the Sri Lanka Pradhana Paramana, I believe their policies and their ideologies differ from that of the president. But I think at the same time, the president has been able to show, give the people a taste of what it is to actually run an efficient government, where there are reforms taking place, where revenue is being utilized in a proper manner. And I think this is the first time, and even, historically speaking, we as a country have been against the private sector. But, so when the world, embraced private sector participation, we chose to stay away from it. And we were left behind. So right now, I think, it's people are able to understand that even when you involve private sector, you get better prices, better quality and whatnot. So I think that's where the difference in ideology is in terms of how a government should be run. And the president is quite progressive in terms of, say, bringing in the Women Empowerment and Gender Equality Bill, in terms of bringing in the finance-based reforms. And these are not reforms I would necessarily see under a Podujana Peramana government, with all due respect to them. And I think that's where the break is.
People also have this view that the current president is somewhat shielding or protecting the Rajapaksas. And over the decades, that's what the pattern has been for politics, where the Rajapaksas protect the president, the current president, and in return, the current president will be shielding the Rajapaksas. What have you got to say about that?
Well, I think there are so many instances that I can give you, because Sri Lankan politics is quite dramatic, and so If you look at 2015, it was 2014, there was President Wickramasinghe, who then, I believe, then a leader of the opposition, who poached Honorable Mahinda Rajapaksa's general secretary and won the election. And similar instances have taken place, right? See, when you have to,
is there really no loyalty in politics?
I don't think you can find loyalty anywhere, not just politics. I mean, it just doesn't exist in that sense. At the end of the day, people will be always putting themselves first, right? It's just human tendency. But what I was trying to say is, you have these two larger-than-life politicians who have been battling it out for nearly half a century. There's bound to be, these theories, right? But I mean, if I can just ask you a question in return, and I hope you don't mind, but can you tell me any politician who has actually not shielded another politician? I mean, it just depends on how you label it. I mean, if let's say President Wickramasinghe, used his vendetta to go after the Rajapaksas and to go after their camp, then immediately you would be asking a question: don't you think he's trying to take political revenge on his opponent?
But is it not the right thing to go after somebody who has done something wrong in the interest of the public and the people?
Of course. I mean, you have to. But that's why we have mechanisms. And those mechanisms are well at play. I mean, we had a sitting president who had his immunity removed right after the Easter bombing. So our mechanisms are in place, right? But I'm just looking at the practicality of it. Now, for example, okay, if there has been any evidence or proof, and please don't think that this is me sitting and defending person A, B, or C, but if there's been any proof or evidence of anything, for example, with any politician, there are mechanisms where they can be convicted. I mean, if you look at the health minister in Sri Lanka, the former health minister, he was convicted while he was in cabinet. So the mechanism does work. But at the same time, what needs to be understood is that if you were to look at the case of Ferdinand Marcos, right? 30 years, 40 years, they also, they had their STAR initiative as well, the Stolen Assets Recovery Initiative. But they were not able to even recover 5% of what was taken out, what was reportedly taken out. So you really need to look at it from a practical point of view. And again, if you are going to have an evidence-based discussion, then it's going to come to a point where then how is the president shielding the Rajapakshas when the Rajapakshas just said they are going to field their own candidate? So it's difficult to say.
Also, people are sort of this opinion that they need a change. They need a newer candidate, which sort of makes an average viewer feel that candidates such as Sajid Premadasa or even Andhra Kumara Dissanayaka might be that change that people are looking for in terms of their policies. And given that, especially this election, we will see voter fatigue with people. People have given votes to so many candidates, so many prominent parties for decades, and yet there seems to be no alleviation of their sufferings. What is your take on that?
I mean, because you brought up Honorable Andhra Kumara Dissanayaka's name, I mean, I should mention it here that in fact he was instrumental in bringing Mahinda Rajapaksa to power. In the early 2000s, at that particular point of time when the president was not able to garner the victory due to manipulation. But overall, you look at this term change. Where does this come from? It's easy for us to say in any setting, in any country, if you look at it, we want a system change. We want a change. Well, the change has to begin with you. My opinion is the biggest problem in this country is not the politicians, it's the voters. They lack voter awareness. If you want a genuine change, then vote for someone based on their qualification.
But wouldn't the politicians be sort of taking that advantage, knowing that the voters aren't as aware?
No,
Isn't that what's helping this?
No, there are two issues, right? The reason I say voter awareness is because at the end of the day, if you have one candidate contesting, in a village all the way, let's say down south, and then you have the leader of that candidate contesting, say, elsewhere, in a completely different province. People will vote for that candidate not because they know the candidate, because they know the leader, right? It's that brand name. And that is what I meant by voter awareness. If you are going to put in effort to come out, protest, and demand a system change, put in the same effort, because we do have educated youth who care about this country. Put in the same effort. Go educate the uneducated. That's what needs to be done. Because when there is no voter awareness, it makes it very difficult. Now we can say that, politicians use that to their advantage, where voters lack awareness, it benefits the politician. Well, then those who are aware create the awareness. That is what democracy is. And apart from that, there's also something else that must be looked at. I really feel there's another issue which, apart from voter awareness, is also the fact that we have not had an electoral reform as yet. We are still following the proportional representation system. Now, I'm a minority in this country, and I'm telling you, the proportional representation system is very good for us. It's very good for the minorities, especially, say, for the hill country community, where they're spread across 13 districts. It's good for us. But as a Sri Lankan, it's the reason why the country has been dragged back, because you have the same politicians coming in time and time again. You don't have, and that's what breeds corruption. That's what breeds nepotism. But let's say if you had an electoral reform, let's say we bring in first past the post system, and yes, maybe we can have reservation or quotas for the minorities or for marginalized communities, for that matter. But if you have an electoral reform, you automatically see the country change. So I think that those two matters is what needs to be, addressed first and foremost.
In Sri Lanka, to be an executive president, you must be Buddhist. You, on the other hand, because of your religious beliefs, even if you wanted to be president, there's that hindrance. Do you think that is fair? Is it necessary to be a Buddhist to be the president of Sri Lanka?
You are referring to Article 9. And, technically, if you look at it, it doesn't say you have to be Buddhist. It says you have to give first and foremost place to Buddhism. I can give first and foremost place to Buddhism. But I will give the exact same place to the other religions and other communities, because you can't have religion dictate politics. That's been the issue in this country, right? Every time we allow religion to override logic, it leads to disaster. I mean, I'm against the fact that religion is being taught in schools. That's something that should be taught at home. You need to have critical thinking in schools. You need to have sex education in schools. You need to have, matters which will actually benefit society. At the end of the day, religion is a very personalized matter. And it's a very sensitive matter. And it should always be within the confines of your home. You have your belief, well and done, but you shouldn't enforce it on your neighbor. Right? And I think that's what Buddhism preaches too. But in terms of, the constitution, I think we do need a new constitution. And we need a new constitution where, you need to address the long-standing ethnic issue in the country. And the only way you're going to address that is by giving everyone an equal place. Because I think all communities have suffered in this country for far too long. It could be the Sinhalese, the Tamils, the Muslims. They've all been through their share of, tragedies. So I don't agree with that, but it is what it is for the time being. But hopefully later on, things might just change.
How confident are you of the current president, Mr. Wickremesinghe's win for this election?
Well, I do believe that when he started off, there were no, we were strictly told that I think last year when I took over as the cabinet minister for water, we were very clearly told, don't try to play politics, don't do anything. Right now, it's we just work on the recovery, and if it works out, people will be there for us at the end of the day. If it doesn't work out, then we better pack our bags, because the task that we took, it was a hit or a miss, right? Either it could have worked or it could have gone terribly wrong, like Bangladesh. But I think it was because of that genuinity which we were able to get through, and I think people are able to see that, because Sri Lanka has launched its largest public-private partnership program, which is the DEED program. Our target is to provide nearly 2 million people deeds, and not because of anything. I think that gives you a kickstarter, and so I think I felt there has been a lot of goodwill amongst the people for the current president, and I think after the separation happened between SLPP and the president, people are more welcoming of him, and I think his chances are fairly strong.
People are also of the view, while yes, the queues have ended, there are no more power cuts experienced in the country, there's also this unbearing levels of higher costs of living. People find it really difficult to go on with their day-to-day lives with rising costs of living. a solution is yet to be given by the government for this issue. And people also feel that this issue of increasing debt, this ball has been passed by the government to the people, and that it's trickling down to the taxpayer. How will this current government sort of go about this issue?
See, we have made a lot of progress from last year. It's not just about, not having power cuts and, having uninterrupted water. And, it's not just about that. It's also about the fact that, earlier on in the interview I mentioned that we have 7 decades of unsustainable governance. And that's what led us to where we are right now. Yeah. I do agree the former regime accelerated it, and accelerated it quite rapidly. But it's not going to be an overnight transformation. If you want an overnight transformation, we're going to be in a situation like Lebanon. It's not going to be pretty. And if you were to look at the cost of living, electricity prices have come down. Similarly, the water tariff is also coming down by 10%. And none of these decisions are politically based, though it's the election period. To someone it may seem like it's politically motivated, but in reality, before I took over, nearly 10 years, there had been no water tariff revision. A decade of no water tariff revision. Why? Because we constantly want to show the people, we're keeping you happy. But I think people need to know the truth. It's not about keeping them happy, it's about keeping them distracted. Because when they are distracted, their focus is elsewhere, and a lot more things happen this way. So you keep all prices down, you force the prices to be down, and it leads to, inevitable destruction. So now, we have a water tariff formula in place, which is being revised every year. You have an electricity formula, you have a petrol formula, and all this, at the end of the day, is a cost reflective or a cost recovery formula. So we have created that element of sustainability, number one. Number two, now my institution, for example, has an $800 million legacy debt. The Water Board is the 5th largest, debt-ridden institution in the country. And when I took it over, we were told, we can't even give 100 connections. As of today, we've given more than 136,000 connections. We've increased the revenue, and we've become sustainable. And it just comes down to that. When we have our state-owned enterprises, we need to make sure they are on a sustainable path, where there's self-governing, and that they're independent without any political intrusions. So when all these happen, naturally the prices of essentials such as, say, potatoes, onions, tomatoes, vegetables, and all other things, they will come down, because at the end of the day, these are the primary factors which decide their logistics, right? So I think people have seen the cost of living come down, and I think they would be seeing that in the future too. But I would just like to add on that at least right now we're in a situation where we're able to talk about the cost of living. 2 years ago we were in a situation where we didn't know if these things are available to us or accessible to us. So yeah.
How important is it for the next president to maintain good relationships within the region, especially with India? How important is that role?
India has always been known as a sleeping superpower, and in the past 10 years, I think they've grown tremendously. Even in terms of their FDI, had we attracted 1% of what they had received in the past 9 years, we wouldn't be in this mess. I think, if I'm not mistaken, about $953 billion came into India from the time of independence, and out of which I think nearly half of it came in the past 10 years. So India has grown rapidly, and it's a shame that we were not part of that growth earlier. But I think for the president in the future to maintain a very good relationship with India is absolutely necessary, just for the sake of our economy. We don't want to get left behind one more time. So, but apart from that, I also think Sri Lanka is in a very special place right now at the moment, because given our geopolitical location and stand, though we are a small island nation, we're an island nation which does not align itself with anyone. We follow non-alignment, which makes us a very good commodity in this particular region. Because though India is a superpower, you do see outright issues between India, Pakistan, India, Nepal, India, Bangladesh, India, India, Maldives, and these issues are there. But I feel Sri Lanka is capable of bringing everyone to the table. We can be the common player in this particular region, and I think that's where we are starting off right now.
My final question, if not for Mr. Wickremesinghe, in your opinion, who is the next best candidate to take on the role of president?
See, I'll be clear on one thing. It's not it's not the Superman complex. This one person is the only person who can save us, and there's nobody else who can save us. It's not about that. See, tomorrow if people vote for someone other than Mr. Wickremesinghe, yeah, I mean, it's not like the country is going to just go into shambles. Right? At the end of the day, things always work out. But the only difference is we've been through an economic crisis. We've felt the brunt of it, and we know what it takes to bring us out of that mess and keep us on that organic path, right? And right now is not the time to trial and error. Mr. Wickremesinghe, the president, he's a tested politician, and though he came into parliament with only his parliamentarian status, he managed to take the reins, and now he has the support of the parliament, and I think he does have the support of the people. And I believe he needs only one more term, and I personally think he will receive it. So, yeah.
Thank you very much for joining.
You're welcome. Thank you for the interview.